Good morning again to everyone. Mm. It is an absolutely beautiful spring morning here in Unity, Maine. It's warmed right up to 35 degrees. Icy rain is falling, which yesterday we had snow, so that's a slight improvement. Um, Spring is reluctant this year, it seems. So you got to see Hakuin's little cabin at the edge of the village. At least that's how I imagine he would have been living, um, given that at the time of this story, he wasn't in a monastery or a Zen community. And Hakuin is, of course, a very famous Zen teacher. All right, I'll do one more thing. Oh, nice. Trying to get back to that gallery view so I can see all your smiling faces. Okay, did it. Okay. Well, some of you aren't smiling. Okay, we're going to have to fix that. Okay, so anyway. So Hakuin was there. And the way the story goes, this is not a koan, but it could be. A young woman in the village got pregnant. And she told the community that Hakuin was the father. And so the community was up in arms. How could this monk have done this? Blah, blah, blah. They descended on him and confronted him and told him that now it was his responsibility to raise the child. Hakuin's response was, "Is that so?" Well, sometime after, years after, the young woman was remorseful. And she went and told the truth that the father was a young man living in the village. And the villagers now all went back to Hakuin's little cabin and to apologize and to take the child back. And Hakuin's response was, "Is that so?" Now, so recently, I don't know why, but I kind of reflected back on that because I had always thought, wow, what an amazing example of non-attachment to the judgments, opinions of others that, when they accused him of this thing that he wasn't guilty of at all, is that so? When they came back and exonerated him, is that so? And I imagine that in between he was treated rather poorly and disrespected because for a monk to father a child was a bad situation. But thinking about it lately, I'm thinking, well, was his response appropriate, especially if we brought it into the contemporary world? Is that level of detachment, of having no response like that, appropriate? Or does it verge on being sociopathic? Try to think of a contemporary example of something like that. Something is, you're working in an office and something is stolen, and the boss comes to you and says, "You must have stolen that. You're fired." Is that so? And off you go. And then a year later, somebody else confesses that they stole it, and the boss calls you up and says, hey, we'd love to have you come back to work. Is that so? How would those responses work when we're living in community and relationship. Your partner accuses you of infidelity. Oh, is that so? They kick you out. You live in a hovel somewhere for a couple of years. And then they find out the truth. They come back. I'm so sorry. I had no idea you weren't infidelitous. Is that so? I don't think so. I think if we put it in a contemporary context, but I'm going to ask you all to respond to this morning, because it goes to really a fundamental question of kind of what is our Zen practice about? What does it mean to be detached or to be unattached, non-attached? Now, I guess non-attachment is the way to say it. What does that mean? Does it mean that we don't react to feelings of others? Do we mean that we don't react to any judgment of others? Should we be completely unperturbed, regardless of the circumstances? And it goes to sort of a deeper, more fundamental question about our practice, because I think in the contemporary world, many people's motivation to practice may not be deep realization, perfect enlightenment, blah, blah, blah. It may simply be a better container in which to live our lives. Margaret sent around an article this week that talked about how sort of a moral failure of Christianity during the time of the Vietnam War, and how many people were drawn to Buddhism at that time because Buddhism seemed to have an ethical, moral response to some of the events happening around the globe. So one way that one might be coming to practice and approaching practice is just that, to have a kind of a foundation, a base, a structure to our lives, have precepts, have practice, have sitting, and so on and so forth, but with no aspiration to become a Buddha, which is good because you can't ever do it. But that's another story. But, with no aspiration beyond those things, to simply live better, be better human being, and so on. So I think this question goes to that. Why are we practicing? What function does this Dharma have in our lives? And are we truly trying to extinguish all attachment and all delusion? Or does that even make sense? In this contemporary world, we are not living in that little hut across the stream there. Well, I am, but that's another story. But, where we are in community, in relationship, in families, in workplaces, in communities. Okay. So I'm going to stop there and throw this out to all of you.
I heard a parallel to this story by Darlene Cohen, who was a teacher at San Francisco Zen Center. Their 20-something-year-old unmarried son fathered a child with a girl who was on drugs, who was mentally unstable and was separated from her family. So the son brought the child to his parents, who were well beyond dealing with babies. And effectively, they said, "Is that so?" And they turned their world upside down and did everything they needed to do to take care of that child. And they came to love the child. About 3 years later, the girl returned to the situation. She was off drugs. She had had the mental help she needed. Her family was back in the picture, and she wanted the child. And they went to court, and the court said, "You must give the child to its mother." And they said, "Is that so?" And they returned the child. And they went back home and they wept. But they did what Hakuin did. Hakuin took the child and totally disrupted his life, cared for the child for a number of years. And when the mother returned, he returned the child. And he went back to his hut and he cried. But we don't hear those parts of the story. We only hear, "Is that so?" I thought that was a really interesting way to look at this story, because attachment can be there. Caring, deep caring, gentleness, support can all be there and still accept what is, whether we like it or not.
Okay, I apologize, Margaret. I'm sure you said wonderful things. I didn't hear a word of it, so I've been trying to get my volume up, and I find my earbuds or something. Again, I sort of forewarned you technological problems this morning. I apologize. Is it possible for you to summarize the punchline?
It was a case where a couple took on the care of a child that they had really had no real part in creating, cared for that child. And then when the courts demanded that it be returned, they did so. Effectively, they said, "Is that so?" each time. But there was deep emotion involved, always. There was connection to people involved, always. There was caring and loving support, always. But acceptance of what was.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for that story, Margaret. That really fleshed out Peter's original talk. A difference that I see was that that the son had actually fathered that child, and so there was no deception involved. And so Hakuin's story was a little different because there was that deception. And I think and we don't know all the story, and it may very well be that Hakuin went to the mother and had a conversation. I don't know what's going on here. You accused me. If I can be helpful in this process to you, I will be. But I think there would need to be some kind, and all of that may have happened because we just don't know the whole story. So I think your summary of the lesson of do what's in front of you, take care of those whom you can, and know that it may be temporary and you may have to let go. So I don't mean to necessarily condemn Hakuin for not taking those steps, because he may have, but it would seem that living in a community would require one to go a little bit beyond just take a strange child without further investigation as to how he could help the mother. And I'm also stretching. I pulled out the precepts, and I'm thinking about, which of lying, I don't know, stealing. I'm not sure exactly how the precepts line up, but seems like there's something going on there that would need further thought.
So I'm very moved by this question. And I have been grappling with this because, on one hand, I have aspired to Hakuin. On the other hand, I'm feeling that calling out abuse is important. So, in my own little micro world, I have just witnessed a family pattern of perpetuating a terrible destructive dynamic that has destroyed multiple generations of relationship. And when I just received another dose of it myself, my decision has been this time grappling and trying to see whether I could truly separate, let go, and is that so, versus trying my best to be non-judgmentally, I don't even want to say compassionate, because I don't want to associate with this pattern. But the softness of understanding a generational trauma in response that can be, visualized very clearly, but calling it. So in my case, it wasn't just about me, it's about my kids. And of course, beyond that, my community and my tribe and the human condition. And not calling it certainly is not something I have attained, and I'm not sure is physiologic. And related to that, for me, for instance, is my experience as a retina surgeon and that environment, et cetera, et cetera. And so my own personal world feels like calling it is important. So there you have it.
Thank you for sharing that.
Nope.
I'm going to just jump in here for a minute because I think that Deborah just brought up that important intersection of the Dharma and psychology and what might be best for our psychological well-being and the psychological being of subsequent generations and so on may not exactly conform with a certain understanding of the Dharma. The Dharma might say, let it go. Trauma doesn't matter. That's just attachment. Every time it comes up, just let it go. Psychology might say, hey, you need to talk about it. You need some help. You need to deal with it in some fashion, or it's going to keep the nightmares and all these things are going to continue. And I think that's fundamental to the dilemma that this story brings up. And I think we need to kind of have think a little more about Hakuin here. He, in this happening, he was completely shamed. His functioning and status as a Buddhist priest was gone. Nobody went to him for advice. He was this guy who had broken his vows, who had hurt this young woman, and so on and so forth. So it wasn't like, okay, I'll take the kid and I'll just hang out for a couple of years. It was that his whole world was torn apart and eventually restored. But so it's kind of like, oof, this is a knife that cuts deep.
Being detached doesn't mean no feelings, no caring. It's more not controlling outcome and recognizing that one can't control outcome. But it doesn't mean you don't give a damn.
But it's not clear that the outcome cannot be engaged with. And if one can truly separate and is willing to separate from, as Peter's describing, the societal attachments, that's great. But with Hakuin, it's a good example. I mean, those years are not restored. And if he could have been contributing in those years, that is not restored. And I'll say the same for my career. Thank God I fought back and saved sight. But if I had been, is that so? The prejudices and jealousies and petty bullcrap that were extant would have prevailed, and I would not have practiced. Because I did practice, it meant that the young women who came to see me could then aspire to becoming a retina surgeon, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, being active. And so I'm feeling a kind of militance, which of course is related to, God forbid, what's going on in our country, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, blah, 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 blah. But so yeah. Oh,
I'm thinking of the Zen peacemakers, and Hakuin did not know, and he was bearing witness what his compassionate action was. Maybe it was raising the child. And that was all he could do. But I would say in the realm of taking compassionate action, it would expand one's ability to try to act in a way that is going to be beneficial for the community, for others.
And the other Buddhist adage, do not harm.
I'm sorry, Margaret, I didn't hear that. Do
Do not harm.
do no harm. Okay, thank you.
So was this child better off with this crazy old monk than it would have been with its mother?
That wasn't the choice.
Well, it wasn't the choice based upon his silence.
That's the part of the story that's the question that stuck with me very much, was by simply saying, non-attachment, to my reputation. Was it appropriate for him to raise the child? And then, of course, that child is being raised, perhaps well, but then ends up losing that relationship when she is ultimately taken away because of his silence, right? Because of his inaction. So was it the compassionate thing to do to practice this non-attachment, the first time around? I mean, as part of our practice, shouldn't we always be thinking of the next acting with compassion? The next, ultimately, isn't that what our practice is about? It's not simply ourselves, but those that we affect.
Thank you.
I'm I had a reaction, Peter, when you said, is the person's name Hakuin? Hakuin? You were asking about Hakuin. Is it sociopathic that he didn't say anything and took the kid in? And I started laughing because I'm like, I mean, I don't know if it's sociopathic, but it's something. I keep putting this in the here and now because that's all we have, right? Is the here and now. I don't know when Hakuin lived and when this story is from, but I don't think it's 2025. And I'm thinking of myself. And I'm like, okay, so let's, oh, God forbid, I had a patient, because I'm behind closed doors with people all day, say, oh, Rob got me pregnant. Or my business partner said, oh, Rob embezzled how much money from the till. In either scenario, I'm not going to, it would not be skillful, to say the least, for me to say nothing and go to jail or raise the child uh, with no license and a divorce, and God knows where I'd be living. um, uh, so that's what I just keep coming back to, and I'm thinking about all the rush, the flood of feelings I would have, which would be outrage and fear and anger uh, and I would of course go to bat for myself and say that I did not in any way do either of those two things. So where does the compassion come in? I don't know. I don't know where the compassion comes in. I think I'd have to have grace for the situation and grace for myself that I'd be placed in an untenable situation, and to not do something about it would be against nature. It would be again. It wouldn't be middle of the road. It would be way over in the side of the road in the gutter, that which is not where I think we're called to live. I think we're called to live in the real world, in the middle of the road, doing correct action as best as we can uh, discern what that is.
Thank you. I think the contemporary context is the only lens we can see this through, in the sense that we're not practicing to become monks in the 1600s. We're practicing to become Zen householders in 2025. And so Hakuin provides a certain context for the dilemma, but I do think we need to reshape the dilemma in this world, in our lives today, and in our practice.
The story might be different if they had paternity tests back then. I feel like he might have taken a more skillful action. I see it as a reminder of my favorite Zen story about the farmer not knowing each of those out, not attaching to each of those outcomes, and not knowing that what seems like a tragedy in one lens might turn into a blessing from another lens with time. So that's what really stands out to me, just a reminder of the not knowing and constant acceptance of reality and not being attached to the outcome. So I appreciate another story of that reminder.
Thank you.
It also seems like he's pointing to as open a heart as you can bring. And I think that in these situations, that is something we can do. However, there's the other part, which is what is our contextual skilled response.
So maybe summing this up in a way, I wonder if our challenge is to integrate the Dharma with our contemporary psychological and social context to bring compassion and skillful means into our lives in the world today. And so there is a way in which the Dharma should always be the lens through which we're looking. And therefore, letting go of anger, letting go of hatred, letting go of judgment, all of the things that arise in our consciousness. People mentioned earlier, bearing witness. Okay, so what is that? That is seeing without all the filters, without all the lenses in place. It's trying to see the reality revealed bare in front of us, not through our agendas, our needs, our wants, all of the things that our ego introduces. And similarly, at the other end, trying to find as skillfully as we can a compassionate response. But what I would suggest is, I don't think we can exclude ourselves from that compassionate response. And so trying to, as best we can, acknowledge the entire picture and acknowledge our role in the picture. And craft a response that will inevitably be less than perfect, but will bring as much compassion to the situation and to others and to ourselves at the same time. That's easy, right? It's not. It's enormously challenging. And one day, last night I was part of a online meeting, kind of a spiritual nature, and we were doing some guided meditations and things. And one of the people in this meeting, then they were inviting comments, blah, blah, blah. And one of the people said, I'm in the middle on things. I don't lean to the right or lean to the left. And I don't have kind of any opinion about what people are doing or saying. And I was amazed how incensed I became. Because in my view, that sounded a little bit like Donald Trump saying there were good people on both sides when that Charlottesville thing happened. And, if people are supporting homophobia, misogyny, racism, anti-Semitism, on, that's a little hard for me to just say, well, that's just another point of view. But at the same time, I was really astonished by how quickly and how strong my anger arose. And so that's in that situation the piece that I need to work on, I think, because once my anger arises, my ability to react skillfully is greatly diminished, if not extinguished. And I just shut my mouth because I knew that at that moment, what was going to come out of my mouth was not skillful means. So we face these challenges constantly, and in this world right now, aren't we lucky to live in interesting times?
So I want to ask about this thing, this idea that we're all one. Little idea we have. So compassion means passion, speaking very simplistically, passion with that we not just identify with the other, but realize that we're all one. But what's been coming up for me has been, it feels like what I'm grappling with is having soft heart for some of these dynamics, the what people are choosing, etc., who are my part of who I am. But it feels like distinguishing is important, not to be judgmental, but to be present to what's going on. It's a tricky thing, because if I turn towards, am I judging, or can I have soft heart but still say we can do better? But that's judging. So I'm just really flopping around with this. It feels like compassion is not physiologic for me, even though we're all one. So
Thank you. The Dharma would say that when we get our ego out of the way, compassion flows naturally. That compassion is the default setting in effect, and we layer it up with all our crap. And if we can get all that crap out of the way, then our natural compassion emerges. I don't know that that's true. I'm not sure that that's true. Steph wasn't sure that was true. We had that conversation. I think compassion takes deliberate cultivation continuously. That, you know, all of these things, I think they challenge us to be continuously awake, to be continuously paying attention both to the externals and to our internal reactions. Now, in that, we may have compassion for others and for ourselves. But, compassion can be a whack on the head. When those teachers used to whack their students, they didn't do it because they were being jerks. Now, through our contemporary lens, we might say, well, that's abusive or something else. But in the context of those times, they were being compassionate. They were waking them up. Wake up. So the form of compassion isn't always a hug.
That adds, thank you.
It just I want to thank you all. I mean, this is so marvelously complex. And marvelous is too nice a word, but this is so devastatingly complex. It's not easy. This human life is not easy. I don't think that little 19th century village I visited. Their life, in many ways, was so much less complex than ours. Their whole world was contained there. They had a little store, they had a little church, they had, and they didn't have electronic gadgets, they didn't have media, they probably seldom got any news, and so, and yet I bet it was, in another way, it was just as complex, that they were, in each other's stuff all the time, and rumors and affairs, and God knows what went on in a little isolated village like that. So, human life has changed dramatically, and in some ways, I don't think it's changed at all. It's just the form of the challenges has changed.
I was recently having a discussion with some friends, and it was a political discussion. And as we talked, my friend said to me, and we were kind of going back and forth with things, and they said, "You're sounding a lot like a Republican." And my response was, as I get older, I see both sides much more clearly. And afterwards, I thought about that and thought, I'm not sure if it's age. I think it's my practice. And our political turmoil has sent me into many books, historical accounts of what has been taking place, say, since the 70s. And the more I study it, the more I see we're all involved. We all brought us to this place. It's not just this or that or the other. It's all so huge and interconnected, and it's just all us. And I think that comes from our practice.
Thank you all. Thank you. I think we should maybe wind up here because we're gonna have tea time this morning. Is it Darjeeling today that we're having, Archie?
BYOT.
BYOT. Okay.
Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to put an end to them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The enlightened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it.
Okay. My closing comment is, I made a comment about Charlottesville a little back a while ago, and there's if in my mind, if you are marching with Nazis and Klansmen and Proud Boys and so on and so forth, it's very hard for me to say that you're a good person. I can't imagine. But do you have Buddha nature? Of course. Can you be a good person? Of course. So the challenge might be, can I see that in you and respond to that in you, rather than becoming angry and responding to those externals, as it were. I'm not there yet, but I think that's the process. Thank you all.